Good afternoon, or almost good evening. Well, it's still afternoon, 5 o'clock. Darkness has befallen Sweden, and I think the sun's been down for quite some while now. I will today talk about a review that I think can help understanding The Singular Universe and the Reality of Time by Roberto, Mangabeira, Unger and Smolin. It's about a renowned nestor within physics. Person I had the privilege of exchanging mails 3 or 4 years ago, and I think I read, well, of course I read all his books, but I also seen all his YouTube clips and yet more, everything that he ever published. I'm a great admirer of him, and Julian Barbour was cooperated with one of the authors of the book, Smolin, many years ago. Review of the Singular Universe and the Reality of Time by Roberto, Mangabeira, Unger and Smolin. The Singular Universe is effectively two separate books held together by some common ideas. Roberto Mangabeira Unger is a philosopher, social and legal theorist, and politician who helped to bring about democracy in Brazil, and has twice been appointed as its Minister of Strategic Affairs. According to Wikipedia, his work begins from the premise that no natural, social, political, or economic arrangements underlie individual or social activity. A similar spirit informs his approach to cosmology. Smolin is of course well known as one of the creators of loop quantum gravity and as the author of several popular science books. For brevity, I should refer to the authors as RMU and LS. The book is over 500 pages in length. The first part by RMU is more than twice the length of Alice and could have been shortened without loss of essential content. There is a final 20-page section detailing differences of view which are substantial in some cases, because Roberto advocates a much greater break with the conventional approach to science than Smolin. The two authors agree that a new historical approach to cosmology is needed. For RMU, the mere fact that the universe has been shown to have a history is enough to indicate that the methods hitherto used to study the universe must be radically modified. Smolin argues for a new approach because of his failures to understand the history and properties of the universe as so far discovered. He points out that despite all their advances, high energy physics and cosmology face a severe underdetermination crisis. That is what fixes the 30-odd dimensionless parameters of the standard model of particle physics, and how can one explain the many apparent fine-tunings for life and the very small values of some dimensionless parameters in the two domains. Both authors criticize anthropic resolutions of the crisis within the context of the multiverse. Smolin points out that their failure to make falsifiable predictions as regard to the individual contributions. Roberto Unger's central thesis is that the science of the last 100 years, above all cosmology, has made a discovery of the utmost significance. The universe has a history. Few will argue with that. Indeed, for me, it is a triumph of the kind of science firmly based on the use of mathematics to describe precise observation that Galileo inaugurated, and an encouragement to continue it. Not so for Roberto Unger, for whom it is the reason to argue for quite a different kind of science. He seeks to invert the widely accepted hierarchy of scientific disciplines in which, on account of their rigor and precision, mathematics and physics stand at the top and provide the framework in which chemistry, the life sciences, social sciences, and history follow in a descending order. Precisely because the universe has a history, the methods of historical research must take precedence over mathematics and timeless laws in an attempt to understand that history in cosmology, timeless laws of physics are given way to regularities which evolve coevally with the phenomena that they describe. As it happens in the life sciences and in political structures in states, cosmology is to become a historical science guided by certain key principles. The most fundamental of these is the inclusive reality of time. This can actually be summarized as 3 principles. Everything that happens in the universe can be arranged along a unique timeline that extends indefinitely far into the past and into the future. Despite the time reversal symmetry of the known laws of nature, this timeline carries an arrow that points inexorably from the past to the future. This is not primarily because of the second law of thermodynamics, but because the very laws that govern change themselves change unidirectionally. Finally, there is, despite the evidence from special and general relativity, a notion of universal simultaneity. This last is either postulated or justified by the reformulation of general relativity as shape dynamics, in which relativity of simultaneity is swapped for relativity of spatial scale. For both authors, these 3 properties express the reality of time and explains the subtitle of the book. The epithet singular applied to the universe has 2 main significances: radical dismissal of all ideas to do with the multiverse as an explanation for the observed properties of the universe, and the need to find a new way to describe the evolution of a unique object. In line with their distrust of timeless laws, both authors have a skeptical attitude to mathematics. Roberto Unger evinces at times an almost visceral dislike of it. He repeatedly claims it robs nature and the universe of both time and phenomenal particularity. The theft of time mainly comes down to the fact that in timeless mathematical syllogisms, the premises and conclusions are simultaneous. This means that the unfolding of a dynamical history is already contained in the law and the initial conditions, so that nothing truly new ever happens. The explanatory power of dynamical laws to model evolving phenomena does not appear to impress Roberto Unger. He believes the evolution of the universe is as unpredictable as Darwinian evolution, or more drastically, the history of political states. As regards to the loss of phenomenal particularity, I did not find an explanation of what it means. I thought it might be related to the philosophical mystery of primary qualities. But whereas Smolin does discuss that at some length, Roberto Unger does not. If Roberto Unger means that cardinality fails to distinguish 3 apples from 3 oranges, he does not say so. Even if he does, in this digital age in which my biometric data enable me to pass through UK passport control in a few seconds, it seems to me that mathematics does a rather good job of capturing phenomenal particularity. The main contention of both authors is that the universe and its history, which are both unique, cannot be described scientifically within the framework of the Newtonian paradigm of standard science, in which timeless laws of nature and given initial conditions are used to Excuse me. Used to describe phenomena that unfold in subsystems of the universe. The two main problems with this approach are identified. First, in accordance with Mach's principle, the framework in which local laws of nature are formulated must be expected to be determined by the universe at large, which will be governed, if at all, by a law or laws of a different kind. At the very least, Roberto Unger is sure it will not be a timeless law with contingent evolution determined by specification of initial conditions. Second, whatever the law in accordance with which the universe evolves, one cannot assume that its form and any constants that it involves remain unchanged. As it happens, my own work on Mach's conjecture that the local inertial frames of reference are determined by the universe at large played a role in the thinking of both authors. So I am certainly sympathetic to the relational aspect of the book. However, I am not persuaded that it necessarily means one should abandon fully the Newtonian paradigm. A simple point-particle model can be used to explain why the laws of standard Newtonian systems defined relative to an inertial frame of reference are invariant under the Galilean group of transformations, with the consequences that their energy, momentum and angular momentum are conserved, having values that are determined by initial conditions. Machian considerations lead one to conclude that the dynamics of an island universe of point particles should be invariant under a much larger group, the Leibniz group. This is in fact a gauge group, which means that the dynamics are subject to constraints. The angular momentum of the universe must vanish, which is a prediction that does not follow from Newtonian dynamics. Moreover, the only natural way to ensure that Newton's absolute time plays no role is to require the total energy of the universe to vanish. By Galilean invariance, the total momentum of the universe can always be set to zero. However, this vanishing of all subsystems of the universe to have non-vanishing values of these same quantities in a frame of reference that is determined by the universe. What is more, the structure of the point-particle model is repeated in a much more sophisticated manner in shape dynamics, which is essentially a relational reformulation of general relativity in the case of a spatially closed universe. What this means is that the basic form of the Newtonian paradigm is retained. One simply swaps Newtonian absolute kinematics for the relational kinematics and a variational principle invariant under a finite parameter Lie group. For one, for a principal invariant under the Lie group that depends on arbitrary fusions, the law of the universe is a timeless gauge law. Thus, I think the relational requirements in no way leads one to abandon the idea that the universe is governed by a timeless law that emits many different solutions. Indeed, the Noether-2 law of the universe explains why the Newtonian paradigm holds in Noether-1 form for the subsystems of the universe. The attempts, mainly by Smolin, to resolve the second problem mentioned earlier do seem to me to have more secure rationale and might lead to real progress, in particular the Darwinian idea which Smolin first put forward a couple of decades ago in the life of the cosmos, namely that whenever a black hole is formed, it gives rise to a new universe in which the values of the constants of nature have undergone mutations, is the only plausible non-anthropic proposal I know that might give a genuine, testable explanation of why the observed values of the dimensional constants of nature do have their observed values. The point is that through evolution, universes whose constants favor copious production of black holes will come to predominate. I suspect that readers will find Smolin's other specific suggestions, some which aim to dissolve the distinction between the current state of the system and the law which governs it, to be either a bit contrived or too radical a break with the well-tested methods of physics to be likely to be successful. A lot of to be's there. However, it is clear that we do face severe problems, or at least major puzzles, in our attempts to understand the universe we find around us. So unconventional approaches should not be dismissed out of hand, in contrast to Smolin's specific proposals. Roberto Unger presents only general arguments. These rely heavily on causal connections and reflect his historical approach. He supposes that the universe has passed through an indefinite number of ages, in which on occasion causal connections have been stressed but never broken. Specifically, this is supposed to have happened at the dawn of our present epoch, when temperatures and densities were high but not infinite. And Roberto Unger conjectures regularities and the phenomena they describe evolve coevally. Perhaps the most striking feature of Roberto Unger's contribution is his blurring of the distinction between laws of nature and regularities. As generalized by Einstein, Galileo's discovery that all bodies fall with the same acceleration holds, so far as we know, universally. In contrast, rules of, say, parliamentary procedure, which have evolved historically, differ from parliament to parliament. I am not persuaded that this difference can be washed away. Roberto Unger argues that it can, and that the stability of the currently observed laws of nature is due to the fact that we live in an atypical cool-down epoch of the universe. Moreover, one significant thing that neither author mentions is that most physical laws take the form that certain combinations of empirically measured quantities are zero. This is the content of an equation. It is not clear to me that the historical or political regularities could ever be cast in this form. I'm also worried about the reliance of both authors on a strong form of causality, in accordance with which, as Roberto Unger asserts, the cause always precedes the effect. I see two reasons to have doubts about this. First, it is often very difficult to identify genuine causal relations. Second, there is the problem of time reversal symmetry of the known laws of nature. A dynamical explanation of the second law of thermodynamics, which is certainly not impossible, would severely undermine the whole basis of Roberto Unger's arguments. Another difficulty in the book is what the authors called the meta-law problem. This arises from the attempt, especially by Roberto Unger, to argue for a universe in which all laws arise contingently and coevalently with the described phenomena, as certainly can be argued to be the case in political history. This raises the question of whether anything, some meta-law, determines what has happened and what will happen in the universe. I do not think either author makes any real progress in resolving the conundrum. However, humans and their unpredictable history are part of this remarkable universe in which we find ourselves, potentially of even greater significance. As RMU points out, humans do seem to be gaining an increasing measure of control of the universe. Who knows what future intelligences will bring about? There is certainly a case for a book of this kind that challenges head-on the most basic assumptions of the way the universe works. And that was the end of Julian Barbour's review. I think it was very kind of him, especially to his former cooperation partner. I will put in something else. I will make a parallel here from quite another subject, and that is the wrong way to move. It is coming from an article, The Science of Inhibition and Endgaining by Patrick Johnson, which is posted in Alexander Technique Terminology Concept. I think this is quite telling. It's an experiment when they want people to leave a chair. It's called the lurch in sit to stand, and the experiment was performed by Tim Cacciatore, Doctor of Medicine. And it begins like this. Proactive inhibition of neck muscle activity. And just let me give you an introduction. What Julian Barbour said, I think it was quite apt, but I firmly believe the proposal of Roberto Unger that we are putting subjectivity first, that we are putting a prejudice into science. And if you can't even control your intellectual capability, which is proven by Alexander Technique experiments, that has evidently and proven very little to do with the body. These are faults in the thinking processes, where the thoughts are coming in the wrong speed and especially in the wrong order. And there seem to be preconceived ideas of how a movement should come about. And somewhere in there starts the problem. And I can't imagine that science is free from this, because there's no transcendental way of creating a theory. I see now the predominant attitude and malfunction of the Western world to think wrongly, to put in things that are not there, and therefore affecting the flow of thoughts, and therefore affecting every statement. There are no exceptions to this. You can't sort of jump out of your own embodiment. Is your thinking order wrong? It is wrong in every and each circumstance. There's no escape. So let's get into the thing. Second, let's look at the study carried out by Ian Loram and his team of researchers at the City University of Manchester. Loram had violinists use real-time ultrasound images to monitor their neck musculature movement during tasks of varying difficulty on their instruments. They were instructed, did I start? I did. Better to be safe than sorry. They were instructed to minimize changes in this neck muscle movement as they played and performed the various movements associated with playing. None of the violinists had any AT training, and no instructions were given on what the image meant or how to change this neck activity. The results show that a violinist could change neck muscle activity using this setup. Their ability to minimize neck muscle movement led to uninstructed effects through the body, including reduced pressure on the violin chin, reduced forward movement of the shoulders, reduced leg muscle activity, and reduced galvanic skin response. Since these changes had no reported adverse effects on the tasks, they were described as a reduction in unnecessary activity and effort. Loram describes this as proactive selective inhibition, meaning that the violinists could inhibit activity selectively in one part of the body without adversely affecting movement in the rest of the body or diminish performance of the task, and B, that this was persistent inhibition rather than a short-lived reaction to an immediate stimulus. Loram also points out that despite the inhibition acting selectively in the neck region only, it produces global positive effects, indirectly inhibiting unnecessary activity throughout the body. In the discussion section of this article, Loram attributes the global effects to kinetic chains due to the complex overlapping nature of muscles in the neck and back. In other words, if you ensure that the neck doesn't activate too much, you automatically minimize activity through the body due to mechanical interconnectivity. Loram calls neck muscle activity a constraint in a positive sense, guiding the whole system towards a more efficient behavior. One interesting aspect of Loram's experiment is that there was no training of executive inhibition of neck muscles. The biofeedback was enough for the violinists to immediately affect the neck muscle activity. This would suggest that information and feedback from the body, in this case, are as or more important than developing generalized inhibitory skills in minimizing neck muscle activity. Loram was inspired by the Alexander technique when designing the experiment, and he and a co-author on the study of both trained Alexander teachers. Neck tension is considered of primary importance in the study of Alexander technique. Loram has explained informally that one intention in the experiment was testing the plausibility of the claims made in Alexander technique about the neck. However, it is not clear that Loram is directly measuring an Alexander technique skill. There is no mention of Alexander technique in the article, and the subjects did not receive Alexander technique training. Furthermore, it is not obvious that the measured reduction in neck activity is the same as what Alexander teachers call freeing the neck. Like all good experiments, this raises a lots of interesting questions and lots of potential for further research. And now to the lurch in sit to stand. The final example is not an inhibition or an end-gaining experiment, but it has implications for understanding this topic. Dr. Tim Cacciatore has studied differences between how Alexander teaches and healthy untrained subjects execute sit to stand. Alexander teachers stand up smoothly, while healthy subjects tend to lurch out of the chair. That is accelerate suddenly at seat off. In follow-up research, Cacciatore had 80 teachers and healthy, untrained subjects stand unusually slowly from sit and stand in 8 seconds, making the task more difficult. Alexander teachers could still perform the task without lurching, while healthy adults without 80 training couldn't stop lurching even if they tried their best. A healthy, untrained control subject and an Alexander teacher tried to get slowly out of a chair without lurching. At the moment of seat off, the healthy subject can't help lurching, while the Alexander technique teacher continues to move smoothly out of the chair. The blue arrows show ground reaction forces from the floor and the chair. These forces change smoothly for the teacher compared to the control subject. In Alexander technique lessons, this lurch is sometimes held up as an example of a student's inability to inhibit and stop endgaming, as if the student just can't resist trying to attain the goal of standing and therefore thrusts himself forward out of the chair. As such, it might be interpreted as a kind of executive function deficit. The student is just bad at inhibiting in the cognitive psychology sense. I think I end there and come to a little summary here. This is body and thinking in itself, and the video I hope I can attach shows that the intellectual / bodily standard is at a very low point. There is no difference between the method of thinking and the bodily result. We know from enormous testing procedures with functional magnetic resonance inference and also EEC, EEG and similar, that today we do not consciously control thinking. It just happens, and it takes a sort of a static consequence or a static sequence. I think this is the cognitive side of the Newtonian paradigm. It is not something shared, it is jumping to a conclusion or jumping to the idea that something exists and therefore ignoring reality and projecting this subjective emotional content somewhere situated but not in the world. It's obvious this is also the transcendentalism of Everett and Tegmark and Sean Carroll for all that. And this is important. This is not to be ignored, because in this subject it's very hard to judge. And there, of course, Julian Barbour has a very clear point. But enormous proof is coming from the body now. If we don't control what world we sort of produce within ourselves, that is not controlled by us anymore. Obviously that world can't be true. Obvious, it will not be physics. And most obviously it will not be real. To adding to this venomous Molotov cocktail against transcendentalism, let's look at how the brain functions. We didn't know that before, but in order to regulate thoughts, the cerebellum, which is so connected to the body, must be shaped, ordered and trained. And that is mostly done with the hand. Without apt training of the hand, the worldview that you have, what you think, will not be controlled by you. It will not be thinking. And here all of a sudden we have the cognitive, scientifically proven side of Martin Heidegger's non-thinking or unthankful thinking. Because it will be a pain to think that well, it will pain your mental side and your body side at the very same time. We know there is no chance to have a bad posture and understand reality. It goes hand in hand. It's impossible to enter the physical reality, because if we tense our neck, all of perception is diminished to a few percents, and those are random. It will not serve you in your wants to understand the world or lead you even more, as Hari Yuvari has shown, that we no longer make good decisions that are beneficial to one's own organism and to one's future. And instead, in 67% of the cases in Israel, people were using choices randomly. I would say that figure is most probably much higher in Sweden or Western Europe, since we become more and more accustomed that it's an exterior structure that takes care of all thinking, and we think all of a sudden, I don't have to think, which is convenient because the Newtonian paradigm doesn't give you the option to thinking, does kill off all intellectual life, and it makes it impossible to construct models. You can only, as Jan Eisken say, copy-paste other people's or institutions or other generalized models. That thinking will not be yours, and it will hurt you. So Unger is presenting a way out of this, and I think the proof will come maybe in the future from physics. Lee Smolin is very humble when it comes to this. It might come, it might not. I'd say we have a very consistent proof already from the cognitive sciences. Neurology is clearly showing that we are not masters of our own thinking anymore. And it feels fantastic to know that the closing of the American mind, which I would say closing of the Western mind, that I read first time 93, now has gotten its scientific proof. I will continue to make this parallel between Unger / Smolin's vision and gems and insights coming from neurology, cognitive science, psychology, and definitely have to take up Gibson once more. Goes hand in glove here. Well, I wish you a very good night. Thank you very much. And here dusk has settled.